The Avro Lancaster is a British heavy bomber from World War II. Created by Avro, it shared its era with the Handley Page Halifax and Short Stirling, all designed to the same specifications and adopted by the Royal Air Force, RAF. The Lancaster was an evolution of the problematic twin-engine Avro Manchester, developed in the late 1930s under the Air Ministry specification P.1336 for a versatile medium bomber. Designed by Roy Chadwick, the Lancaster was powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Merlins, and some versions used Bristol Hercules engines. The Lancaster debuted with RAF Bomber Command in 1942. It quickly became the backbone of night bombing campaigns over Europe. Its spacious bomb bay allowed it to carry the largest bombs used by the RAF, including the 4,000 pounds, 8,000 pounds, and 12,000 pounds blockbusters. This capacity made it the principal heavy bomber for the RAF, Royal Canadian Air Force, RCAF, and other Commonwealth and European squadrons. Its dominance overshadowed other bombers like the Halifax and Stirling. One of the Lancaster's notable contributions was its modification to carry the bouncing bomb for Operation Chastise, targeting German dams. Although it primarily flew night missions, it also excelled in daylight precision bombing. Some were adapted to carry the massive 12,000 pounds Tallboy and 22,000 pounds Grand Slam earthquake bombs, giving it the heaviest payload of any bomber during the war. In 1943, a Lancaster was converted to test the Metropolitan Vickers F.2 turbojet, later testing other engines such as the Armstrong Siddeley Mamba and Rolls-Royce Dart turboprops. Post-war, the Lancaster was succeeded by the Avro Lincoln as the RAF's main strategic bomber. It transitioned to roles like long-range anti-submarine patrol, air-sea rescue, photo reconnaissance, aerial mapping, and as the Avro Lancastrian for transatlantic passenger and postal service. Notably, in March 1946, a Lancastrian made the first scheduled flight from London Heathrow Airport. Development. In the 1930s, the Royal Air Force, RAF, focused on twin-engine bombers. This approach was driven by the limited demands these designs placed on engine production and maintenance, which were already stretched thin with the introduction of many new aircraft types. To improve performance despite power limitations, Britain heavily invested in developing large engines in the 2,000 horsepower range. However, by the late 1930s, these engines were not yet ready for production. Meanwhile, both the United States and the Soviet Union were successfully developing 4-engine bombers, which offered excellent range and decent lifting capacity. Inspired by these developments, the RAF decided in 1936 to explore the potential of 4-engine bombers. The Lancaster's origins can be traced back to a twin-engine bomber designed to meet the British Air Ministry specification P.1336 of 1936. This specification called for a twin-engine medium bomber capable of worldwide use, including carrying a torpedo internally and performing shallow dive bombing attacks. Additional requirements included a mid-mounted cantilever monoplane wing, all-metal construction, and the use of the Rolls-Royce Vulture engine, which was still in development. Various twin-engine designs were submitted by Fairey, Boulton Paul, Handley Page, and Shorts, using engines like the Rolls-Royce Vulture, Napier Sabre, Fairey P.24, or Bristol Hercules. However, most of these engines were still being developed, and the potential for 4-engine bombers was also being considered under specification B.1236 for a heavy bomber. These designs required stronger aircraft structures to support the extra engines, increasing the overall weight. Avro submitted the Avro 679 to meet specification P.1336, and in February 1937, both Avro's and Handley Page's designs were selected, with the latter as a backup. By April 1937, prototypes for each design were ordered. Avro's aircraft, later named the Manchester, entered RAF service in November 1940. Despite being a capable aircraft, the Manchester suffered from underpowered and unreliable Vulture engines. Consequently, only 200 units were built, and the Manchester was withdrawn from service in 1942. By mid-1940, Avro's chief design engineer, Roy Chadwick, was working on an enhanced version of the Manchester bomber. This new design, initially called the Type 683 Manchester III, would be powered by 4 reliable Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, arranged using the power egg installation developed for the Beaufighter II, and fitted onto a wing with an increased span. This aircraft was later renamed the Lancaster. The prototype, serial number BT308, was put together by Avro's Experimental Flight Department at Ringway Airport in Manchester, utilizing a modified Manchester airframe and the new wing designed to support the extra engines. Test pilot H.A. Sam Brown took it for its maiden flight on January 9, 1941, at RAF Ringway in Cheshire. Flight tests quickly demonstrated that the Lancaster was a significant improvement over its predecessor. The first prototype initially featured the Manchester I's 3-fin tail, but this was updated on the second prototype, DG 595, and all subsequent production models with a larger elliptical twin-fin tail unit, which was also used on the last Manchesters built. This modification increased stability and enhanced the dorsal gun turret's field of fire. Additionally, the second prototype was equipped with more powerful Merlin 20 engines. During production, some Manchesters on the assembly line were converted into Lancaster BI models. Recognizing the superior performance of the Lancaster, the decision was made early on to rapidly equip twin-engine bomber squadrons with the new aircraft. The first production Lancaster, designated L-7527, made its first flight in October 1941, also powered by Merlin 20 engines. Avro initially secured a contract to build 1,070 Lancasters. Most of these bombers were assembled at Avro's factory in Chatterton, near Oldham, Lancashire, and test-flown from Woodford Aerodrome in Cheshire. Recognizing the high wartime demand that exceeded Avro's capacity, the Lancaster Aircraft Group was formed. This consortium included various companies, either performing primary assembly or producing components for the Lancaster. Beyond Avro, other manufacturers also built Lancasters. Metropolitan Vickers constructed 1,080 Lancasters, which were also tested at Woodford. Armstrong Whitworth and the Austin Motor Company in Longbridge, Birmingham, joined the effort later in the war. Post-war production continued at Vickers Armstrong's facilities in Chester and Castle Bromwich, Birmingham. Although Short Brothers in Belfast had an order for 200 Lancaster B.I.s, this was cancelled before any aircraft were completed. Production of the Lancaster extended overseas as well. In early 1942, a decision was made to manufacture the bomber in Canada at Victory Aircraft in Malton, Ontario. Among the later variants, the Canadian-built Lancaster BX was the most notable, with 430 units produced. These Canadian Lancasters were nearly identical to their British counterparts but featured Packard-built Merlin engines and American-style instruments and electrics. In August 1942, a British-built Lancaster BI was sent to Canada as a pattern aircraft, marking the first transatlantic crossing by a Lancaster. The first Canadian-built Lancaster was named the Ruhr Express. However, the initial batch of Canadian Lancasters delivered to England had faulty ailerons, a problem traced back to the use of unskilled labor. By the end of World War II, over 10,000 Canadians were working on the Lancaster production line, achieving a production rate of 1 Lancaster per day. The Lancaster BI remained in production until February 1946, never fully replaced by a successor model. Aviation experts Brian Goulding and M. Garbett noted that the Lancaster BI saw few changes throughout its production, largely due to its robust structure and design. Some visible modifications included the removal of fuselage side windows, an enlarged perspex chin for the bombeimer, and a larger astrodome. Additional bumps and blisters were added to house radar equipment and radio navigational aids. Certain Lancaster BIs were also equipped with bulged bomb bay doors to accommodate larger payloads. Early models of the Lancaster BI featured a ventral gun turret. However, feedback revealed that the ventral turret was seldom used, leading to its removal during many aircraft service life. While some squadrons discarded the turret entirely, various trials and experiments were conducted at RAF Duxford and by individual squadrons. A batch of 50 Lancaster BIs built by Austin included a Fraser-Nash turret above the bomb bay, but this modification proved unpopular due to obstructing the internal walkway, making crew movement difficult. Different turret configurations were tested by various squadrons, often resulting in the removal of one or more turrets. The Lancaster B-3, powered by Packard Merlin engines built in the United States, was otherwise identical to the BI. A total of 3,030 B.IVs were produced, primarily at Avro's Newton Heath factory. The BI and B-3 were manufactured simultaneously, with minor modifications made to both models as new batches were ordered. The designations BI and B-3 were effectively interchangeable, depending on the engines used. For instance, modifications included relocating the pitot head from the nose to the side of the cockpit and switching from de Havilland needle blade propellers to Hamilton Standard or Nash Kelvinator paddle blade propellers. Design. The Avro Lancaster was a key British four-engine strategic bomber used by the RAF during the latter part of World War II. Typically powered by four wing-mounted Rolls-Royce Merlin piston engines, each driving a 13-foot de Havilland Hydromatic 3-bladed propeller, the Lancaster could impressively return home on just two engines and manage short distances on a single engine. Aviation experts Brian Goulding and M. Garbett noted that skilled Lancaster pilots often outmaneuvered Luftwaffe fighters. They described the Lancaster as a near-perfect flying machine, fast for its size and very smooth, a delightfully easy airplane to fly. There are accounts of Lancasters being looped and barrel-rolled, both on purpose and accidentally. The Lancaster's design prioritized structural strength, allowing it to withstand some damage from enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire. However, the first year saw some structural failures in the Lancaster B-IS, leading to accidents when design limits were exceeded. Unlike its contemporaries, the Lancaster had a smaller escape hatch, making it harder for crews to bail out. Only 15% of Lancaster crew members successfully bailed out, compared to 25% from Halifaxes or Stirlings and 50% from American bombers. The Lancaster featured a mid-wing cantilever monoplane configuration with its wing and fuselage constructed from 5 main sections each. Most of the fuselage was metal-covered except for fabric-covered ailerons. These sections were pre-outfitted with necessary equipment before final assembly to speed up production. It had a retractable main undercarriage and a fixed tailwheel, with hydraulically actuated main landing gear that retracted rearwards into the inner engine nacelles. Its distinctive tail unit featured large twin elliptical fins and rudder arrangement. While the Lancaster had many strengths, it had handling quirks. During dives, it tended to steepen as speed increased, unlike the Halifax, which became tail-heavy and leveled out. The Lancaster also suffered from longitudinal instability at speeds over 200 miles per hour. The Lancaster's standard crew consisted of 7 men, each with specific roles within the fuselage. At the nose, the bomb aimer had 2 main positions. Primarily, he lay prone on the floor of the aircraft's nose to control the bomb sight, with the Mark 14 bomb sight to his left and bomb release selectors to his right. Through the large transparent nose cupola, he also assisted the navigator with map reading. When manning the Fraser-Nash FN-5 nose turret, he stood up to operate the twin .303-inch guns, each with 1,000 rounds. The bomb aimer's position included the nose emergency hatch, which, at 22 by 26.5 inches, was challenging to exit with a parachute. Efforts to enlarge this hatch were unsuccessful. On the bomb bay's roof, the pilot and flight engineer sat side by side under the canopy, with the pilot on the left and the flight engineer on a collapsible seat to the right. The flight engineer monitored the fuel selectors and gauges on a panel behind him. The pilot and other crew members had an auxiliary emergency exit panel above the cockpit, while the mid-upper gunner used the rear entrance door to escape. The tail gunner exited by rotating his turret, opening the door, clipping on a parachute, and using the rear entrance door. Behind the pilot and flight engineer, separated by a curtain to allow work with light, sat the navigator facing port with a chart table in front of him. Above the table, an instrument panel displayed airspeed, altitude, and other necessary information. The wireless operator's radios were mounted at the left-hand end of the chart table. The wireless operator sat facing forwards, with a window to his left and the astrodome above for visual signaling and celestial navigation. Moving further back, the wing's 2 spars created a significant obstacle for crew members. The mid-upper gunner's turret was situated at the bomb bay's end, with the floor dropping down to the fuselage's bottom. This position allowed a 360 degrees view over the aircraft, armed with 2 Browning .303 Mark IIs, each with 1,000 rounds. The gunner sat on a canvas rectangle beneath the turret throughout the flight. The side crew door, located behind the turret on the starboard side, served as the main entrance and an emergency exit. Near the tailplane spars was the Elson chemical toilet. At the fuselage's extreme tail end, the rear gunner sat in the tail turret, entered through a small hatch. The cramped space often led gunners to hang their parachutes inside the fuselage near the turret doors. Neither the mid-upper nor rear gunner positions were heated, requiring gunners to wear electrically heated suits to prevent hypothermia and frostbite. Defensive armament. The Avro Lancaster was originally equipped with 4 hydraulically operated Nash and Thompson Fraser-Nash turrets positioned in the nose, tail, mid-upper, and underside. The tail turret had 4 Browning .303 Mark II machine guns, while the other turrets had 2 each. During the later stages of the war, a young Freeman Dyson proposed removing most of the Lancaster's defensive armament to increase its cruising speed by up to 50 miles per hour, thereby reducing the bomber's interception rate and human losses. However, this idea was not adopted since the Lancaster, even with the increased speed, would still be vulnerable to the faster German night fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 110 and Junkers Ju 88. Nose turret. The FN-5A nose turret, similar to the one used on the Avro Manchester, Vickers Wellington, and Short Stirling, remained unchanged throughout the Lancaster's service life, except in cases where it was removed entirely. Ventral turret. The FN-64 ventral turret proved ineffective due to its limited periscope view and slow targeting capability. By late 1943, modifications were made in response to German Schräge attacks, including installing downward observation blisters and unofficial mounts for .50-inch machine guns or 20mm cannon. However, These modifications were limited by the placement of the H-2S radar blister in the bomb bay configuration. Mid-upper turret. Early Lancasters featured the FN-50 mid-upper turret, which was later replaced by the improved FN-150. This turret had a coaming with a cam-operated interrupter to prevent the gunner from accidentally shooting the aircraft's tail. Later models, like the Mk7 and Mk.X, used the heavier Martin 250 CE-23A turret, which had an internal mechanism to prevent firing on the aircraft itself, eliminating the need for a coaming. Tail turret. The tail turret, equipped with the most formidable armament, was crucial for the Lancaster's defense. Starting with the FN-20, which was replaced by the FN-120 featuring an improved gyroscopic gun sight, these turrets were not without flaws. Rear gunners often removed sections of perspex to enhance visibility, a modification known as the Gransden Lodge modification. Ammunition was fed from tanks near the mid-upper turret down the fuselage to the tail turret. Some Lancasters were fitted with the Rose turret, which was open at the back for better visibility and armed with 2.50-inch machine guns. However, it was not widely adopted. Radar and advanced turrets. Radar technology eventually enhanced turret effectiveness. The FN-121 was an automatic gun-laying turret, AGLT, with village and gun-laying radar, which proved successful in reducing operational losses by targeting night fighters. Towards the end of the war, Lancasters started using the FN-82 turret, which featured 2.50-inch machine guns and a gun-laying radar, similar to those used on early Avro Lincolns. However, the downside of radar and radio systems was that they could be detected by enemy forces. Bombs. The Avro Lancaster was known for its versatile bomb load capabilities, enabling it to carry out a range of missions effectively. Here's a detailed look at the bombs it could carry. Standard bomb loads. Industrial demolition load. Typically, this included 14 medium-capacity high-explosive bombs, each weighing 1,000 pounds. Area bombardment load. This often involved a mix of a single 4,000-pound cookie blast bomb along with 12 small bomb containers, SBCs, each holding 236 incendiary bombs weighing 4 pounds each. Bomb bay. The Lancaster featured an unobstructed 33-foot bomb bay, which allowed it to carry various bomb loads, including high-capacity, HC, cookie bombs. Initially, the heaviest bomb carried was the 4,000-pound HC cookie. Later modifications included bulged doors to accommodate the larger 8,000-pound and 12,000-pound cookies. Small bomb containers, SBCs, these held 236 incendiary bomblets weighing 4 pounds each or 24 larger bomblets weighing 30 pounds each. General Purpose High Explosive, GP/E, bombs, these came in 500-pound and 1,000-pound variants. Mines and depth charges. The Lancaster could carry 1,850-pound parachute-deployed magnetic or acoustic mines, 2,000-pound armor-piercing bombs, and 250-pound semi-armor-piercing bombs, primarily used against submarines before 1942. Post-1942, it also carried 250-pound and 500-pound anti-submarine depth charges. Special bombs and missions. Operation Chastise, the Dambusters raid, 617 Squadron used modified Lancaster B-3 specials to carry the 9,250-pound upkeep bouncing bomb. These modifications included removing the bomb bay doors and fitting the bomb on V-shaped struts that released it at the press of a button. The bomb aimer's position was enhanced with a simple wooden aiming device and Aldis lights for precise altitude control during the drop. Precision bombing. After the Dambusters raid, 617 Squadron transitioned to high-altitude precision bombing, preparing to use Barnes-Wallace's earthquake bombs. This included carrying the 12,000-pound Tallboy and later the 22,000-pound Grand Slam bombs. Modifications for these missions included removing the dorsal turret, reducing the rear turret's armament, installing Rolls-Royce Merlin Mk24 engines, removing bomb bay doors, and reinforcing the undercarriage with stronger main wheels. The Lancaster's bomb load versatility and the ability to carry specialized weapons made it a critical asset for the RAF during World War II, performing both strategic bombing and precision attacks effectively. Radio, radar, and countermeasures equipment. The Avro Lancaster featured advanced communication and navigation systems for its time, making it a formidable tool in the RAF's arsenal. Here's an overview of the equipment used. Communication system. British-built Lancasters, fitted with the R1155 receiver and T1154 transmitter, providing radio direction finding along with voice and Morse capabilities. Canadian-built and Far East Service Lancasters, equipped with American radios, offering similar functionalities. Radar and navigation systems. H-2S, a ground-looking navigation radar operating at 3 GHz frequency. It eventually became detectable by German night fighters using the FUG 350 Naxos receiver, necessitating cautious use. The American H-2X radar, with a higher 10 GHz frequency, did not face this issue. The H-2S radar was housed in a large blister under the rear fuselage in later models. Fishpond, an enhancement to the H-2S radar, providing additional coverage of the aircraft's underside to display attacking fighters on an auxiliary screen in the radio operator's position. Monica, a rearward-looking radar to warn of approaching night fighters. However, it could not differentiate between enemy fighters and nearby friendly bombers, eventually serving as a homing beacon for German night fighters. It was removed after mid-July 1944 once this was realized. G, a navigation system using synchronized pulses transmitted from the UK. Aircraft calculated their position based on the time delay between pulses. The range of G was 300 to 400 miles, with a whip aerial mounted on top of the fuselage ahead of the mid-upper turret. Boozer, radar detector, lights mounted on the instrument panel lit up when the aircraft was being tracked by Würzburg-Riesa ground radar and early model Liechtenstein airborne radar. It was often triggered by false alerts over Germany, making it more disconcerting than useful. Oboe, a highly accurate navigation system using a receiver/transponder for 2 radar stations in southern England. It determined the aircraft's position and was fitted to Pathfinder aircraft, usually Mosquitoes, to mark targets for the main force. GH, similar to Oboe but with the transponder on the ground, allowing multiple aircraft to use the system simultaneously. GH aircraft were marked with 2 horizontal yellow stripes on the fins. Countermeasures. Village and automatic gun laying turret, a radar-aimed and ranged gun turret fitted to some Lancaster rear turrets in 1944, identifiable by a radome mounted below the turret. Airborne cigar, ABC, fitted only to Lancasters of 101 Squadron, it had 3 7-foot aerials. These aircraft carried a German-speaking crew member to jam ground-to-air communications to German night fighters. This extra equipment and crewmen added around 600 pounds to the bomber's weight, reducing the bomb load by 1,000 pounds. Due to the nature of the equipment, the enemy could track these aircraft, resulting in 101 Squadron suffering the highest casualty rate of any squadron. Tinsel, a microphone installed in the nacelle of one of the engines, allowing the wireless operator to transmit engine noise on German night fighter control voice frequencies. These advanced systems and countermeasures significantly enhance the Lancaster's operational capabilities, despite the risks and challenges associated with their use. Operational history. Second World War operations. In early 1942, No. 44 Squadron, based at RAF Waddington, Lincolnshire, became the first RAF squadron to convert to the Lancaster, followed closely by No. 97 Squadron, also based at Waddington. The Lancaster's first operational mission occurred on March 2, 1942, involving the deployment of naval mines near Heligoland Bight. The first bombing mission happened on March 10, 1942, targeting Essen in Germany. However, all Lancasters were temporarily grounded after a crash on 20th of March in Boston, Lincolnshire, for inspections. The first recorded casualties among Lancaster crews occurred on March 24, 1942, when our 5493 was shot down by anti-aircraft fire over Lorient. Due to high loss rates in operations, daytime bombing missions were seldom performed until the Allies achieved aerial superiority. On April 17, 1942, 12 Lancasters from No. 44 and No. 99 squadrons undertook a low-altitude bombing raid on the Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg AG engine manufacturing plant in Augsburg, Germany. Despite heavy losses, the mission successfully bombed the factory. This attack revealed the Lancasters' capabilities to both Germany and the British public. On 27 April, an unsuccessful small-scale attack on the German battleship Tirpitz was performed by Lancasters from both squadrons. The Lancaster participated in Operation Millennium, the first 1,000 bomber raid against Cologne, on the night of 30/May 31, 1942. By this point, Lancasters outnumbered the preceding Manchester in operational service. The Lancaster was used by RAF Coastal Command starting on June 12, 1942, loaned from Bomber Command for long-range anti-U-boat operations. Additional large-scale raids were performed in June 1942 against Emden and Bremen, with a long-range raid on Danzig proving less effective. By July, significant portions of Bomber Command's strength were directed against Dusseldorf. August 1942 saw major raids on the Ruhr and Duisburg, emphasizing the disruption of the German Navy. A significant improvement in bombing accuracy came with the formation of the Pathfinder Force, PFF, in August 1942, with squadrons transferred to locate and mark targets using target indicator flares. Early operations produced mixed results but proved decisive against Castle's Henschel aircraft factories on 27/28 of August. That same night, 12 Lancasters from No. 106 Squadron flew to Gdynia, attempting to hit German battleships, but persistent haze hindered their efforts. Despite being designed for night operations, daylight raids were also performed by the Lancaster. Lone Lancasters conducted decoy raids to disrupt enemy production. A notable daylight raid was performed on October 17, 1942, when 90 Lancasters bombed the Schneider Works in Le Creusot, France. In late October 1942, the first bombing missions over Italy targeted Genoa and Turin, followed by a raid on Milan's railway infrastructure on 24 October. November saw attacks alternating between Italy and Germany, with multiple raids on Osnabrück and Turin. Throughout 1942, the Lancaster remained in short supply. Training and crew conversion were typically performed by the squadrons themselves due to the lack of aircraft with dual controls. Centralized servicing was introduced later, and by the end of the year, Bomber Command had around 200 Lancasters in operational service. In January 1943, Berlin was raided by an all-Lancaster force for the first time in over a year. New bombing aids and radial-engined Lancasters were introduced. Notable raids included Turin on 4 February, Lorient, and Milan. The Battle of the Ruhr strategic bombing campaign began on March 5, 1943, with 140 Lancasters participating in the initial attack on Essen. In April 1943, key targets included Stuttgart and Pilsen's Skoda works, although the latter raid unintentionally struck a large asylum. May saw continued operations against the Ruhr region. One of the most famous Lancaster missions, Operation Chastise, occurred on 16 May 17, 1943, targeting the Ruhr Valley dams with bouncing bombs designed by Barnes-Wallis. No. 617 Squadron executed the mission, which later inspired the book and film The Dam Busters. Following Operation Chastise, the Ruhr continued to be a primary target. June saw Lancasters operating from North Africa in Operation Bellicose, targeting the Friedrichshafen radar factory and the La Spezia naval base. July included a major raid on Turin. During late July and early August 1943, Operation Gomorrah devastated Hamburg with round-the-clock bombing, resulting in significant civilian casualties. On 17/18 of August, Operation Hydra targeted the Peenemünde Army Research Center, a key site for V-2 rocket development. Berlin faced multiple raids in August 1943, followed by heavy bombings of Hanover, Munich, Kassel, Frankfurt, and other cities in October. The Royal Canadian Air Force's Lancaster squadrons also became operational around this time. Air Chief Marshal Harris advocated for continued bombing of Berlin in late 1943. The Battle of Berlin saw 16 major bombing operations between November 1943 and November 1944, with Lancasters flying the majority of sorties. Despite high losses, the raids were deemed satisfactory by officials. In April 1944, Lancasters targeted key locations in France, such as Villeneuve and Rouen. By May, Bomber Command had around 1,100 aircraft in daily operations, including 616 Lancasters. June and July saw extensive bombings of the Atlantic Wall fortifications and support for the Normandy landings. On June 14, 1944, a large-scale daylight raid targeted enemy shipping at Le Havre and Boulogne, with Lancasters becoming more involved in daylight operations due to the Luftwaffe's decreased capabilities. Nighttime bombings focused on military concentrations and infrastructure, including U-boat pens and V-1 flying bomb sites. Throughout the latter half of 1944, Lancasters participated in high-profile missions against the German battleship Tirpitz, resulting in its eventual sinking. By early 1945, modified Lancaster B-IS were deploying the massive 22,000 pounds Grand Slam bomb. In the final months of the war, Lancasters continued to target key industrial sites and provided direct support to ground forces. RAF Lancasters also participated in humanitarian missions like Operation Manna, dropping food into the occupied Netherlands to alleviate starvation. This mission involved over 3,000 sorties and was a significant relief effort. By the end of the war, the Lancaster had established itself as a crucial element of the RAF's strategic bombing capabilities, renowned for its versatility, range, and payload capacity. Assessment. From 1942 to 1945, the Avro Lancaster flew 156,000 sorties, dropping 608,612 long tons of bombs. Only 35 Lancasters completed over 100 missions each, with the most successful one completing 139 missions before being scrapped in 1947. By the end of the war in Europe, about 50 squadrons were equipped with Lancasters, mainly the BI model. The Lancaster was involved in almost every significant bombing raid of the European conflict from its service entry. Adolf Galland, commander of the Luftwaffe fighters, called the Lancaster the best night bomber of the war. Arthur Bomber Harris, head of Bomber Command, praised it as Bomber Command's shining sword. Goulding and Garbutt noted, the achievements of the Lancaster and its crews have been widely acclaimed, and the aircraft has been described as the greatest single factor in winning World War II, an exaggeration but a pardonable one. Lancasters were to be the main force of Tiger Force, the Commonwealth Bomber Group plan for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan in late 1945. These aircraft were painted white with black undersides and equipped with additional radios and navigational aids for the Pacific Theater. Large external fuel tanks were tested in Australia and India but were deemed too vulnerable. Alongside Avro Lincolns and Liberators, they were to operate from bases in Okinawa, but the invasion was rendered unnecessary by Japan's surrender. The Lancaster was briefly considered for carrying the atomic bomb but was not chosen once the Boeing B-29 Superfortress began modifications in November 1943. Using the Lancaster would have required less aircraft modification but more crew training. Its lower ceiling and slower speed posed a risk from the bomb blast, and it had a shorter range. Thus, the B-29 was preferred for the mission. Major General Leslie Groves and General Henry H. Arnold favored an American plane to avoid potential delays and difficulties from using a British aircraft. Due to its robust design and operational success, the Lancaster led to various military and civilian derivatives. The Avro Lincoln, initially the Lancaster 4 and 5, became the Lincoln B.1 and B.2. A civilian version, the Lancastrian, was developed by adding nose and tail fairings and seats. The Lincoln also led to the Lincoln Inn and the York, a transport aircraft with a larger fuselage. The Lincoln further evolved into the Shackleton Maritime Patrol aircraft, which served until replaced by the Hawker Siddeley Nimrod in the early 1970s and as an airborne early warning system until 1991. The Tudor airliner, using Lincoln wings and a new tubular fuselage, was another derivative. Post-war use of the Avro Lancaster. Royal Air Force. The Lancaster continued to be a key aircraft for the RAF even after World War II. Notably, during the summer of 1946, No. 35 Squadron's Lancasters toured the United States, where they were signed by American movie stars and kept these signatures until their retirements. 2 Lancasters, PD-328 and PB-873, embarked on impressive long-distance flights, including round-the-world and transpolar trips. The Lancaster BI gradually made way for the improved BI, FE, and B-7, FE, models. Between 1947 and 1948, No. 82 Squadron received new PR.1 photo reconnaissance models based on the Lancaster BI, which were painted silver and lacked defensive turrets. These aircraft conducted aerial surveys of Central and East Africa, with at least one operated by the Ministry of Aviation. RAF Coastal Command also operated a few gray-painted Lancaster Mr.1s, primarily based at RAF Kinloss. The introduction of the Avro Lincoln, a development of the Lancaster, led to a gradual phase-out of the Lancaster, although this took several years. The last Bomber Command Lancaster was retired in December 1953, and the final RAF Lancaster, a reconnaissance aircraft, is believed to have been retired in late 1954. French Aéronavale. Between 1952 and 1953, Avro overhauled 59 Lancaster B.IS and B.VIIs at Woodford and Langer, delivering them to the French Aéronavale. These aircraft were used by 4 squadrons for maritime reconnaissance and search and rescue roles until the mid-1960s. Argentine Air Force. In 1948 to 1949, 15 former RAF Lancasters were overhauled at Langer for the Argentine Air Force. During their service in Argentina, these Lancasters were used in both offensive operations and to support military coups. Royal Canadian Air Force. Starting in 1946, the Royal Canadian Air Force, RCAF, modified Lancaster MKXs for aerial and photo reconnaissance missions, mapping northern Canada until the early 1960s. The RCAF operated 70 modified Lancasters, designated Lancaster 10 Mr/MPs, for maritime reconnaissance and patrol roles. These modifications included the addition of radar and sonobuoy operators' positions, removal of rear and mid-upper gun turrets, and installation of a 400-gallon fuel tank in the bomb bay. They were eventually supplemented by the Lockheed Neptune and replaced by the Canadair Argus. Transport role. After World War II, Lancasters were used as transport aircraft to repatriate thousands of POWs and troops until November 1945. Civil conversions continued post-war. 4 Lancasters were converted into freighters for British South American Airways but were retired after a year due to inefficiency. 4 Lancaster IVs were converted into tanker and receiver aircraft for in-flight refueling development, one of which flew non-stop from London to Bermuda in 1947. These tankers were later used in the Berlin airlift, performing 757 sorties. From 1943 to 1947, the Canadian Government Transatlantic Air Service, CTAS, operated modified long-distance transport versions of the Lancaster Mark X, known as Lancaster XPPs, for transatlantic military passenger and postal services. The inaugural flight from Montreal to Scotland set a record time of 12:26 hours. These aircraft completed hundreds of trips across the Atlantic, helping usher in the era of commercial air travel. By 1947, the service was integrated into TransCanada Airlines, which continued using the Lancaster XPPs until they were replaced by Douglas DC-4s. Surviving Avro Lancaster aircraft. Of the 17 surviving and largely intact Avro Lancasters known to exist, 2 are airworthy. PA-474, operated by the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, based at RAF Coningsby in Lincolnshire, UK. FM-213, known as the Mynarski Memorial Lancaster, this aircraft is painted with VRA markings to honor Andrew Mynarski. It is operated by the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Additional Lancasters with working engines. 2 other Lancasters have functional engines, although they are not airworthy. Just Jane, NX 611, this BMK-VI Lancaster is housed at the East Kirby Lincolnshire Aviation Heritage Centre, about 9 miles east-northeast of RAF Coningsby. Just Jane can taxi but is not currently flight-worthy. However, there are ongoing plans to restore it to flying condition. Bazalgette, FM 159, located at the Bomber Command Museum of Canada in Nanton, Alberta, this Lancaster has been restored from a vandalized state and is now capable of taxiing under its own power. Notable tours and displays. In 2014, the 2 airworthy Lancasters, Canadian FM 213 and British PA 474, embarked on a UK tour, participating in a series of joint aerial and ground displays, which drew significant public interest and media attention. Recent restorations and commemorations. KB 882, in 2017, after over 50 years on display in Edmundston, New Brunswick, Lancaster KB 882 was relocated to the National Air Force Museum of Canada in Trenton, Ontario. It is being restored to be displayed alongside the museum's restored RAF Handley Page Halifax heavy bomber, NA 337. 2018 commemoration. To mark the 75th anniversary of Operation Chastise, the Canadian FM 213 Lancaster was repainted in the markings of Guy Gibson's 617 Squadron aircraft, code AJG, ED 932, which he commanded during the famous Dambusters raids. Thank you for watching our detailed documentary on the iconic Avro Lancaster bomber. We hope you enjoyed this journey through history, exploring the engineering marvel and the courageous missions that defined Bomber Command during World War II. If you're passionate about aviation history and World War II documentaries, be sure to check out our other videos and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we dive into the history of another legendary British aircraft. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.